Hey guys, welcome back to Jess Checks Out, and I am back with a book review. I know I just posted a video the other day, but Elektra comes out today, and I really wanted to talk about it because there's a lot, and I love it, but I think it's going to be a very difficult book for some people to read, so I want to say ahead of time, spoilers abound, because if you know anything about the Trojan War, you know what some of these things are coming, and I want to make sure that everything is well established. Elektra was given to me as an arc, and I'm so excited because Jennifer Saint is now an autobi author for me, and I don't say that very easily because I don't have a whole lot. If you know me, that basically comes down to like Erica Ridley and Olivia Dade for the most part. I'm very picky about what I read, even if I love an author. Jennifer Saint is one of those authors for me. She has got so much skill, and her sophomore debut is so much different from her freshman debut. There's more emphasis on setting and mood, and I think she's done a really good job of figuring out what really works for her. I will say that I have a bunch of content warnings up here that I can't always say, and that will be things like, you know, a variety, including, child murder, murder in general, infanticide, SA, all kinds of, cannibalism that involves babies. So it's a very hard book to read. It also has a lot of postpartum depression, depression in general, PTSD. Like, these are all very difficult things to talk about, but I want to discuss them in this because I think it's really important. And I know I keep playing with my hair. I'm sorry. I can see my mirror, and so it's starting to bother me. Not mirror, but back of my phone. So, to start with, I'm going to attempt to say the name. All right. Clytemnestra. I'm going to call her Clemmy, just so we're clear, because I cannot say that word again. And you have Cassandra and Elektra. Those are the three major players. If you know, some of them are part of the big Trojan War. Cassandra, because of her always ever-present warnings that no one ever listened. Clemmy, because she was married to Agamemnon, who was Menelaus's brother from the Trojan War. And of course, Helen was her twin sister, although Helen was from Zeus and Clemmy was, normal. She was immortal. And so, of course, you have Elektra, who is Clemmy and Agamemnon's daughter. You probably know a little bit from the Elektra complex, but there's a little bit more to this story, and I think that Saint did a really good job of interweaving them. I don't want to say too long, and I don't want to give too much away, because I think it's worth reading. But I think you need to be aware of, Saint did a really good job of talking about, how do I put this, about how toxic and like possession can be a problem, because there's a couple of really good quotes, and I put them on my Bookstagram review, which is also going up today, and I will have that linked below. But essentially, it basically talks about how the war was not fought because people loved Helen. It was fought because they hated Helen. They hated what she represented. They hated what she got, the fact she was beautiful. And that really relates to what we hear about today, right? Like, we talk about domestic partners. We talk about house strangers. I know in Atlanta there was a recent kidnapping because this woman said no to these two guys that wanted to go on a date with her, and they met at the gas station. Like, these are all things we hear about. There's this very toxic anti-woman establishment, and that doesn't just mean like cis women. That means women in general, trans, non-binary. In general, if you're a woman, it's kind of a no-go. So I wanted to point that out because it runs very well throughout the book, and I think it's an important messaging, because sometimes when we talk about the Trojan War, we talk about all the things the great men did, but we never talk about what the women did. And if you liked A Thousand Ships by Natalie Haynes, this is a very different take on some of the same actions because they're coming from a different point of view. Like in A Thousand Ships, you often see it in the Trojan point of view rather than the other kind. You also see Penelope as well. In this one, Penelope and Helen are not really represented. If you don't know, Penelope is actually Clemmy and Helen's cousin. So that's kind of an important element to add to this conversation. And so Odysseus is like cousin-in-law, kind of direct family because they were close when they were together. And then Clemmy talks about things like what happens when you choose unwisely, and I think that that's something that a lot of women have dealt with, especially when divorce is not an option. You see it a lot in you see this very often in some Regency romances when mamas are pushing their daughters to marry well versus not, and you also see it in like remember the movie Titanic when the mom was like, no, no, you need to marry Cal because he's got all this money, and Rose was like, but I don't like him, so it's got that very feel, and so it's not something that's back then. It's current too because we tell kids to marry someone that's got money and status, and especially women because but then they're called gold diggers. Same thing Helen was going through, right? So it's very real and it's very honest, and I really appreciated that element. I read this book, most of it in one day. I do not recommend doing that. I recommend taking breaks after each part. There's 4 parts, and there's about 10 chapters in each part. I recommend taking breaks between them because there were a lot of content that was really hard to read. There was sexual assault multiple times, the stealing of, slave girls, and of not being able to be free. And a lot of those conversations, there was, oh God, Cassandra had a lot. She wasn't a primary in here because it was basically Clemmy and Elektra because that's their family. But Cassandra actually had a point in this because she kind of intersects when, as you can tell, my dog agrees. When the dog, when the characters intersect at the end of the story. So it was very interesting to see that point of view. But Clemmy talks about the house of Atreus. Y'all, that is some really content warning stuff I'm going to talk about right now. That talks about infanticide left and right because it's very much a part of the Greek tragedy. It is what it is. However, it also talks about like slaughtering babies and then having the father eat them more than once. This book talks about that. So I want to put that out there because I think it's a very important content warning. I'm pregnant right now, as I announced in the last video, and that's a huge trigger for me in some ways right now, and I was not expecting that. When I signed up for this, I didn't realize that the infanticide was going to involve, eating your children. Not really a normal conversation topic that you have in books, but I wanted to point it out because I think it's important. That one really disturbed me, as well as well, if you let someone live, then you're just bound to die about it, because Agamemnon killed his uncle. Yeah. And like he let his son go because Clemmy requested it, and so then they come back, and of course Agamemnon dies, but Agamemnon's a dick, so okay, fine, bye. I mean, to go to that, Agamemnon sliced his daughter's throat as sacrifice to Athena for a good wins to Troy. They were there for 10 years. Was it really worth it? And it really kind of made Clemmy fall into a deep postpartum depression because she was pregnant at the time. So she has her son. All this stuff is going on. And she just cannot connect with him. And again, trigger warning for that because I think if you're pregnant or you've had a miscarriage or stillbirth or anything like that, there's very much a very real possibility this is going to be a difficult book to you to read. I do recommend it, but I think if you have a lot of issues with things such as child, mortality, murder of children, stuff like that, maybe I would postpone this book for a little while, just as a clear indication because it was really hard for me to read, but I did read it, and I want to take that into account because I think sometimes reviews don't always do that, and I'm trying to do that very carefully with this book because I think it's a fantastically written story where you go through how these 3 lives interweave and how they intersect, and you see when Cassandra is eventually raped and defiled in the Athena temple. She's already been assaulted by Apollo, basically making sure that she'll have nothing but visions that no one will believe because she refused him. Because, heaven forbid a woman refuses a god. And so it's a very deeply entrenched part of this. And I think that a lot of that does come from a lot of the Greek stories and Greek tellings, but it's kind of a hard read. But like I said, with the writing, Say's writing is amazing in this one. Like Ariadne had a few points that were needed to be a little bit fixed, and in this one, sometimes I felt like they were jumping around a bit much because like 1 minute you were 2 years into the war or a year into the war, and then you were 10 years into the war. And I feel like there were some things we needed to learn along the way, especially with Cassandra and Elektra and Clemmy, because Clemmy and Elektra were very antagonistic because Elektra idolized her father. And like I get that. I did that with my dad too. And when they fall from grace, when that happens, it's devastating. But the problem with Elektra is she never really got that. Everything was her mother's fault. Everything because her father was never there. He did not see and interact with her in a way except to be the good dad. And there's of course matricide because it's tragedies. But there's a lot of conversations about how when Clemmy dies, um, Elektra and her brother, who is the only male, basically go to get revenge because of their mother killing their father. But they don't take into account at all the fact that their father killed their oldest sister. And by trickery, because in this book, I'm not sure, each one has something different, but in this one, the idea was that Agamemnon tricked the mother and daughter to come because of being promised to Achilles, which again, if you read any kind of historical romance, you know that never tends to go very well. But I want to bring it up because you feel for the characters, but in some ways, like I didn't connect with Elektra as much as I thought I would, and I think maybe part of that is because I am becoming a mom, and it's much more, like I have to do this type stuff. So I can understand, a mom's point of view better than I could. But even before I was a mom, I don't know if I would have understood Elektra all the way. And Cassandra, I just felt heart heavy for because she didn't ask for any of this. All she wanted was for Apollo to give her visions, and instead you get hell, basically. So I want to bring that up because I think that's a very important part of their storyline and what that happens. And I really like this book, and I'm going to get it in hardback. If you remember my Christmas, I actually got Ariadne in hardback for my husband, which was an amazing present that I did not expect because I usually don't buy hardbacks. I like never buy hardbacks, but this one I bought. He bought for me, and I'm going to get Elektra as well. I think that Elektra may be a misnomer of a name, however, because I feel like it's a little bit more than Elektra. I think it's the fall of Atreus is probably a better way of putting it. I put up a maybe, but I get it because it's one word, and that's kind of Jennifer Saint's branding. And I'm so glad that Flatiron and NetGalley gave me an arc of this. I don't think I can explain how much this meant to me because I love historical fiction. I love Greek mythology. I love how they're interacted. But I do want to. I keep. I see a lot of the same themes. I said Trojan War. I see Medusa starting to catch up. Pandora. You see a lot of these, and I'm really hoping they'll go into some of the more smaller ones, maybe. Like, what about doing like Echo and Narcissus? Because I would love to see that, especially because in social media right now, it's ripe for the Narcissus case, right? And for Echo, and seeing that because, like, think about stands and social media influencing. So I think it would be perfect for that. So I'm hoping that maybe the next ones will be other stories that maybe don't get as much use in modern adaptations or even in just retelling. I would love to see like a historical retelling of that as well from Echo's point of view, because when I learned it in like 6th or 7th grade, it was not nearly detailed on the whys, just the whats. And I would like to hear more of the whys. I love to explore. So I gave Elektra 5 stars. It almost was a 4.5, but honestly, like even with my discomforts, they were my discomforts versus the technicality and the writing style, so I gave it 5 stars regardless. I will say, again, if you have problems with certain topics, they're a big display. I'll put it back up here in case. You should probably maybe avoid, especially if you have issues with, you know, degradation and decapitation of children, basically. I want you guys to be aware of that when you go in, because again, that one shocked the ever loving hell out of me. Okay, I think that's all. If you have any questions, let me know. Again, in the comments, if you really want to tell me, please let me know what mythology you would like to see rewritten, redone. It doesn't have to be Western either. Like, it just can be something that you think no one talks about and you'd like to see it in books, as we're kind of falling into that repackaging and retelling and readapting, things that we learned early on. All right, guys. I will see you next time. If you liked the video, please subscribe. I always forget to say this, so I'm trying to remember to do it more often. And I will see you next time, where I will probably be talking about my Q1 reading or my April reading. I don't know, whichever one comes out first. Bye, guys.